My name is Beth Blauer. I'm the director of the Center for Excellence here at Johns Hopkins University. We are a new center established in March of this year. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our work, but thought that I would start first talking a little bit about myself because I'm a narcissist and that's what we do. No, I'm just kidding, but not totally. So I have been working in and around government for since 2002 when I started off as a juvenile probation officer here in the state of Maryland. I think that between the thesis around Casebook and the work that we heard a little bit about Deloitte was doing this afternoon, I can completely relate to a lot of the issues that they were trying to focus their work on. And as a juvenile probation officer, I can tell you that I was responsible for intake and making decisions in a very acute situation when children were faced with probably one of the most serious moments of their lives to see whether or not they should be detained or whether or not they should go home. And I was asked to make those decisions at intake with zero information about whether or not any of the sister agencies in my state were working with that child, whether or not that child had been to school the day before, whether or not that child had eaten that day, whether or not that child had a social worker actively involved in his or her life. And I had to make those decisions blindly based on a police report depicting something that seemed to be a symptom of something much larger that most of those children were facing. And I was actually a licensed attorney in that position, and I had taken this job as a probation officer while I was studying for the bar exam. And so I didn't have too much to lose, and I became a real pain in the ass to everyone that I worked with because I was very vocal and outspoken because I felt like I didn't have much to lose or to give up. And something really interesting happened to me is that I never left. So I stayed working in government for 12 years after I passed the Maryland bar exam because not only did I fall in love with the challenges, but I fell in love with the capacity for solutions and the depth of the people that I got to work with in government. And so 4 years after joining the department, I was able to lead the department as its chief of staff. And when Martin O'Malley was elected governor of the state of Maryland, he instituted something called StateStat, which we heard a little bit about ComStat and HomeStat in the earlier presentation. And at a certain point, he tapped me to be the leader of StateStat. And I got to lead the state's StateStat initiative, where we oversaw about 85% of our state's budget and a comparable amount of our workforce through this data-driven performance management program that allowed us to take data from across every state agency and align it to outcomes and problems that were shared not only by us good government folks, but also by the people we were serving in government, and trying to figure out how we can take advantage of the alignment of data with solutions and communicate back out to the public on what we were doing as a call to action, because we know that as government we cannot solve all problems, that we need to work together with our communities. And we had some success in doing that, not just success in improving those outcomes for residents and citizens, but we had some success in making government work better and making data more usable in government. And that was the area that was exciting to me the most, was that data could move through government. You just had to ask the right questions, and you have to have a certain level of pain in the assery, which was endorsed through the process. And so I became probably the least appreciated or loved person in state government, but maybe one of the most effective, because we were able to move huge mountains, going and integrating data that was living in antiquated data systems where hardworking bureaucrats were doing what we would call pivot reporting, which was taking data out of machines and pivoting their chairs and inputting it into other systems, and actually create some mechanisms for usable data to flow in organizations. And we had, like I said, a big impact. And it was an impact that was felt both internal to our government and also external to the people who were living in our state. And then I left. government, because I thought that it would be great to try to scale some of those tools that we were building. I saw an opportunity to work with a number of different governments, and I started to build tools within a SaaS context to help cities and states and national governments figure out ways where they could better leverage the use of data. And through that work, I met this bespoke little organization called Bloomberg Philanthropies in New York City, where they were really interested in the work that we were doing, and they had been investing a number of dollars and time in interviewing mayors of mid-sized cities around what they thought were their biggest challenges to actually moving the needle in important outcome areas. And they thought that they might want to make an investment in figuring out better solutions to problems that scale across mid-sized cities. And so they invested an unprecedented amount of money, $42 million, in the What Works Cities initiative. And What Works Cities has a goal to work with cities so that they can use data to improve people's lives. And it's based on the principle that cities are already doing this work to a certain extent, and we need to help bolster those things that are working. We need to identify those practices to invest in that will continue to pay dividends for those citizens, and then we need to teach other cities on how to do it so that they can do it for themselves, and then we can create a community of practice around the use of data and evidence in government. And I'm not doing this alone. So I'm working at Johns Hopkins as one partner in this initiative. I am joined by some what I would consider world-class partners also in this work. So I am joined by Results for America, which is a nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C., which is focusing on sort of getting the cities to participate, working with the Sunlight Foundation, which is one of the oldest good government organizations, also based out of Washington, D.C. The Behavioral Insights team, which is going to be working with a number of cities doing this work. I don't know if anyone's familiar with BIT and the work that they do, but they have invested a number of years at 10 Downing Street doing what they're called the Nudge Unit. So I love that, Jewish mother, and Nudge Unit. But they essentially nudge government into action by trying to think about small tweaks in the way that they operate and the way that they take approaches in their programs to excise real value out of, and it's a very data-driven. So a good example of their work is they changed wording 3 different times on a revenue collection letter that went out to constituents, and then they measured which one got the most money, and then they changed to that one, and then they got 30 million extra pounds in their coffers that they weren't collecting. And so it's to do that, but it's not just to do that for government, it's to teach government how they can do that to excise more value out of their own work. And then you might have heard of the school, it's called Harvard, it's whatever. And they are also joining us as a partner. They've created the Government Performance Lab. It's almost like a reskinning of their social impact bond lab. And they're going to be doing work training city managers on how to attach value in the way that they contract with vendors. And so how do we integrate outcome measurement into a relationship that we have, not only with those people that we are procuring services and goods from, but also the way that we grant our dollars. And we're doing that all together as a partnership. And the work that I'm doing is focused on 3 areas. So in the next 3 years, the team here at Hopkins will be doing 150 assessments of mid-sized cities. So we will be on the ground in those cities where we will determine their acuity for doing work that's driven in data and evidence. The second piece of work is we'll be working with a smaller number of cities that will start or we will advance their open data practices. So if they don't already have an open data program, we will help them stand one up with our partners at the Sunlight Foundation. If they already do, we will do a review of their practices and make sure that they are adhering to the best practices, the standards, that they have governance, that their programs are sustainable, that their data is well maintained, that they're not faced with unreasonable barriers to extracting data out of their systems. We're going to give them the tools to be able to do that. And then the third line of work that I'm going to be working in is also leading a team that's going to be standing up stats in cities. A small amount of cities we're going to be standing up stats or performance management programs. If the city already has an approach, we're going to be bolstering those approaches so that we get mayors starting to think about data on a day-to-day basis to inform their daily work, to think about how they can align data to their outcomes. But we're also going to be a convener. So how do we pool data comparably across participating cities so that we have the ability to benchmark, to very rapid fire spread the use of best practices. I love what's happening in Virginia from the prior presentation. How do we integrate already existing standards and best practices in the way that methodologies that data is collected and shared so that you can get maximum benefit? This is not about transparency. This is about moving government forward, and this is the exciting piece of this. I'm also part of the 21st Century Cities initiative here on campus, where I will be able to, for some reason, influence the academy. I'm not qualified to do that, but apparently they think I might be. So we're going to have a team of faculty that's going to be affiliated with the center, that are going to be paired with cities to help crack some of the tougher nuts that they're trying to crack. And we're going to be doing all of that work with the idea that we're going to be creating the 21st century tools for cities to navigate different emerging political landscapes. So you can get a little bit of a flavor for where we are. We get to pull from resources across the university. We'll be creating a master's level graduate program that will accompany the work that we're doing. We're going to be working to certify city employees in different data and analytics methodologies so that they will be able to continually provide great quality work in the cities in which they work. Here's a little bit about my team. It's kind of a boring slide. And then, although I love my team, for those of you that are in the room, sorry, Nick. And then this is a little bit about what we're doing. We're fundamentally linked to all of our partners through a common standard, and the idea here is that in all of our practices, we are asking for things for the cities that are going to participate ultimately in the program. That is, one, that the mayor and the senior team have to actually commit to doing this work. This isn't a press release, this is hard work, and we're asking them to actually do this work and commit to it. The second piece of this is we're going to be asking them to collect data. So they're measuring the things, most important things to them, the things that they think are the highest impact for their city, that they're using data and evidence to drive decision making around that. And the third thing is we're asking them to take stock. We're asking them not only just to measure this data, but to actually pull together the right stakeholders around a table and actually think about these problems, think about why it's important. Data is only one piece of the solution here. You also actually have to have a conversation about it. You have immense subject matter expertise that are leading your cities. We need to be deferential to that subject matter expertise, but we need to make sure that their work is also entrenched in data and evidence. And finally, we're asking them that they take it all the way to the action, so that not only is the city taking action, but they are using data as a call to action for cities. I only have 5 minutes, and I really wanted to, if there's any questions, so I'm totally just going to do this, and then we're going to be done. So,
way to go.
Any questions? That's an Ignite session, by the way.
That is an Ignite session.
Mic drop.
I have a question about how you see.
You're right by the speaker, Daniel.
Last year we had a panel on the different data domains. So one of the things we looked at was the siloization of data between big data, PII, open data, and kind of observed that everybody was working in their own silos, and collectively that there was a bigger insight when you look at those together. Have you thought about how that construct will work because of your work in open data, your work in performance data, and obviously the work in Maryland on PII data? Because we think that's a really sort of a new breakthrough area in terms of how do you really work both at a community, an individual level, or an organizational level.
So, I think that one thing is government. I think that there are some governments that have big data, explorable big data that will be able to be used. But I think that there are a lot of governments that are still far from actually being real big data users. I think that we're in a some of the most I think, exciting work for us is to see investments that are being made in cities actually creating sensor networks and actually creating the capacity to pool big data. But I think that some of the most influential data around decision-making programs, what's best for children and families, what's best for residents in a city, is in smaller sets of data, in the data that's most likely to be requested or to foiled or PI'd, or and then in open data, I think that open data, this is Beth Blauer open data. And I think open data has got a bad rap right now. I think that open data, to a certain extent, has been an exercise in transparency. And the goal here is to actually make open data. It is about opening data up so that we can engage a larger population of stakeholders into helping government advance. And I think that should be targeted. It should be well maintained. It should be strategic. I think that it also should be the first step to getting there should be opening data so that interagency data sharing exists, where instead of going right from I'm an agency and I'm a data hoarder to now I'm public because I'm pouring it out into the web, that data should be shared with internal stakeholders in government so that we can make sure that it does meet quality standards and value standards, but I think that there is a convergence here. And we're obviously focusing on how do we create a flow of data out of government, and not necessarily just for the reasons of transparency, but really for helping government operate better.
Another question? Right there. Kathleen has a question.
Howard Lehman from Johns Hopkins.
My colleague.
Well, the School of Medicine was missing, so I'm going to try to introduce them. It strikes me as you're talking that there are these clinical data research networks that have been put together, but they actually don't know what they want to research. So it just strikes me that you guys could actually come up with the questions that those networks ought to answer for you.
Yeah, and that's the idea with having faculty. So the faculty really are not necessarily, they are basically going to be working with us to develop, what we're doing is we're creating a first-time opportunity for the faculty here at the university to actually tap into real practical problems, real practical need, and we're doing that by pairing them with cities that have committed to doing this work, and then to layer in the ability to bring in world-class researchers to really help figure out what they should be investing in, what is working for them, what is returning results for them. And we're talking about not just traditional GDP measures of this. We're talking about are the people that are living in our cities thriving? Are they happy? Are they connected meaningfully to our city? Are they working? Are they doing all of the things that we know will eventually have an impact on GDP, but that we need to solidify initially before we can even get to the point to really do like traditional ROI analysis on it. So you're absolutely 100% on point. And I will add to my slide the School of Medicine. All right.
Kathleen had a question, right?
Hi. Hi, Beth.
Hi.
That's terrific. Thank you. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss something. So I was wondering, you started in state government. You understand very well all that, Michigas. And so now you're working in cities. So I'm trying to understand, how does the state data relate to cities? A lot of child welfare, all that stuff is state, and yet a lot of people live in cities. And so could you talk a little bit, are they working on social services problems and health and human services problems as well, or are these more, education things that are more locally controlled?
So the state, for me, what I found most compelling about the work when I was working, because I was in state government, and then when I went into working at Socrata, my customers were largely cities, and so for me, I was like, oh, this should be easy, it's smaller. But it's clearly not the case. And one of the things is the state really, in a lot of, even in the human services funding mechanisms that are well-worn paths from the federal government are a pass-through. And the programs and implementers of the services and programs are being paid either from the city or they are beholden to the city through agreements and grant agreements. And so if you think about some of the challenges around housing, some of the challenges around transportation, some of the challenges around education, they are really the arbiters of a lot of frontline service that the state is at arm's length from. So depending on where you are, right? In Maryland, there's a very strong, the agencies have a very strong role at the front lines, and they've created frontline service delivery. In a lot of other states, that's just not the case. And so, we're working with cities to not only be a convener of the right stakeholders so that they can drive their data practice forward, but also how do they start to create a network of data sharing with the state so that will alleviate the burden of reporting for federal programs, and the idea here is that maybe we can also influence, how GIPR modernization works as it gets, thrusted down. We saw what the Recovery Act reporting requirements, how that impacted everyone from the federal government down into the local level for those people that were, weatherizing homes, and that data was being collected at a city place. So how do we create this network of flow? And then also, in my opinion, the most important conversation is how do we standardize it so that if it's happening in one program, then it can be scaled across any city that's participating in that program, or if it's delivered a certain result and a city wants to also glean a result, a sim-like result, they can go and look at how the methodology around how the data was collected, how the program was implemented, and have at its fingertips access to those resources and those solutions and the capacity to do that work.
One last question.
Wow, I got one question in at the end of the day. Thank you. My name is Bernadette, and I really appreciate your bias towards action and your emphasis on measuring. I've spent the last over 5 years of my life trying to get federal agencies to publish high-quality authoritative data using international data exchange standards. I noticed Socrata started there too, and then moved over to local and states generally. Are we kind of throwing up our hands and just acknowledging defeat in terms of federal agencies and their use of standards? Because I'll tell you, my observation is, working collaboratively with lots of people around the world, the federal government thinks it's reinventing the wheel. They think they have problems around metadata and publishing data that no other government has had.
Yeah.
And we've left behind, sadly, about 15 to 20 years of web science in the United States, and it's very disappointing. And Europe continues, and Brazil continues to just leapfrog what we're doing at a federal level.
So I'm a total optimist, and I am gonna, as you can tell, and look, I think that I've gone from the state down to, because I thought the bureaucracy at the state was just like incredible, and then that you can be much more agile at the city level. So I can't imagine the challenge at the federal level. I mean, I have no experience with it except for being sort of tangentially involved in a few initiatives. It's a big, big, big thing. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that what we'll end up doing, and hopefully, this is the idea, is that if we do our jobs right, collectively, then we can. There will be no decision to make. There will be no gray area. That we'll be able to lead by example. But I think that there are some glimmers of hope. I think that the work that the White House is now leading around the criminal justice data is incredibly compelling. To go and to start thinking about it from the perspective of standards, and to go to police, where for me as a person that worked with police, that wouldn't be the first place that I would go. And so they're doing it, they're thinking about it in a standardized way, and they're thinking about it in a way that not necessarily that will necessarily actually be able to be forked and lifted and moved and impact other areas. And I think that it's bold, it's exciting, and they've got great stakeholders at the table. So if they do it right, I think it is an example. Is it going to be, I think they chose a very sexy topic. And when, the child welfare people come and say, well, we've got kids who are languishing in foster care, we'd like for you to, rally the troops around helping us solve that problem. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. And that, I think, is, I think it's not necessarily a infrastructure investment. And so that's where, we're focused on is how do we create infrastructure in the city so that they can do this work and that it's, it doesn't change with political will.
Thank you, Beth, very much.